More than 1,000 people have been arrested for their roles in the January 6th riot so far. The nonprofit group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, also known as CREW, that group combed through all of the public legal filings related to January 6 defendants. And they found that at least 174 of those defendants said, in one way or another, that they were answering Donald Trump's calls when they traveled to Washington and joined the violent attack. That is more than 1 in 10 January 6 defendants. And those are just the ones that this nonprofit could prove for certain were incited by Trump. 94 of them specifically cited Trump's remarks on January 6th as why they swarmed the Capitol. But in terms of deciding to make the trip to Washington in the very first place, this nonprofit found the same thing happening over and over again. Evidence of January 6 rioters planning during the same few days in late December of 2020, planning that they would go to Washington. This Capitol rioter from Iowa sent a Facebook message on December 21st saying, "We're going back to Washington, January 6th. Trump has called all patriots. If the electors don't elect, we will be forced into civil war." On December 22nd, the leader of the Florida chapter of the Oath Keepers sent this message: "We are thinking this is the plan. He wants us to get the bleep kicked off. Trump said it's going to be wild. He wants us to make it wild." And all of those messages came shortly after this one. A tweet from President Trump at 1:42 in the morning on December 19th. Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. Now, that middle of the night tweet, it does not seem to have come out of thin air. We are seeing more and more reporting that Special Counsel Jack Smith is now zeroing in on a White House meeting that ended just after midnight that very night, just over an hour before Trump sent that "will be wild" tweet. You might remember this meeting because of the headlines about how the arguments during that meeting got so heated that they nearly ended in a fistfight. That is not typically what happens in White House meetings, at least as far as I know. Anyway, it was a 6-hour-plus meeting in which Trump aides who were trying to push election fraud claims, people like Trump's lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and his former national security advisor Michael Flynn, they all tried to use bogus fraud claims to convince Trump to adopt one drastic plan of action or another. And Trump's White House legal team fought back, debunking those fraud claims and reportedly physically threatening to actually fight over them. This was the meeting in which Trump was presented with a draft executive order that would have directed the U.S. military to seize voting machines all over the country. Trump reportedly considered that executive order seriously enough that he called his national security advisor on speakerphone, again during this meeting, so he could get his opinion. Should we use martial law to overturn an election? Phone a friend. Another one of the plans floated that night involved making Trump lawyer Sidney Powell a special counsel to investigate election fraud. Remember how in the Dominion Voting Systems lawsuit against Fox News, we got text messages from Fox hosts describing Sidney Powell? In November of 2020, Tucker Carlson texted Laura Ingraham, "Sidney Powell is lying, by the way. I caught her. It's insane." Ingraham responded, "Sidney is a complete nut. No one will work with her. Ditto with Rudy." That was what Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham thought of Sidney Powell a month before this White House meeting. But Trump actually considered making Sidney Powell a special counsel. In Bob Woodward and Robert Costa's book, Peril, they reported that Trump called his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, in that meeting, too, also on speakerphone. "Make Powell a special counsel," Trump reportedly said. "Mark, you get her the forms. Give her the forms to onboard her." Again, that meeting, pitching and seriously considering ideas this boffo, that lasted more than 6 hours. It was so long and so heated that the meeting moved from room to room throughout the White House, with people just arguing and yelling at each other until past midnight. And we don't know how, and we don't know exactly why, but right after all of those wild gonzo ideas fell apart, just about an hour after the end of that meeting, Trump seems to have settled on something. Quote, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild." After that meeting, literally hours after it, came Trump's push to get people to the Capitol on January 6th, to get people specifically to pressure Vice President Mike Pence that day to not certify the results of the presidential election. And in the years and months since then, that plan has poisoned our politics in ways we are still dealing with today. Joining me now are MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin and Christy Greenberg, a former federal prosecutor and former deputy chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Lisa, you and I have talked about this meeting that happened on December 18th into December 19th. Special counsel Jack Smith is presumably talking about it with his own investigators right now. And I guess I'd love both of your perspectives. I'll start with you, Lisa, in terms of what this meeting represents to them in the larger investigation into Trump's role on January 6th.
I think it represents two things, and let me start with the second one first. That meeting is the pivot point, and you talked about this in your introduction. Somehow between December 18th and the early morning of December 19th, Trump's theory of the election fraud morphed from some sort of Dominion voting, foreign interference theory to let's focus on state legislators. Let's see what we can do on January 6th itself. Let's bring people to the Capitol to protest. Be there, will be wild. And one of the things I think might be interesting to prosecutors is that after the White House staff left the meeting that night, there were a few people that were still in the room with President Trump for maybe up to an hour. And those people include Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell. And exactly what was discussed in that meeting when folks like Eric Hirschman and Pat Cipollone and Derek Lyons, part of the White House staff, left.
Team Normal, as they call themselves.
Totally. Team Normal, who had already been at, wit's end with Team Crazy, Sidney Powell and Byrne and Flynn, almost coming to fisticuffs with them, right? What happened after Team Normal left, I think is of central interest to prosecutors here.
Christy, it's meaningful because it shows this ADBC sort of like transition to the January 6th plot, right? And intent, but also the fact that Team Normal was in the room is super relevant here too, right? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, it would be evidence that Trump knew what he was doing was fraudulent, right?
Absolutely. So you have the grown-ups in the room who are saying there was no election fraud. You lost every lawsuit you brought. And this is completely bogus. And these plans from the three stooges that are in the room, Mike Flynn, Sidney Powell, and the Overstock guy, Patrick Byrne, these plans are preposterous. And you can't possibly declare martial law. You don't have the authority to have military come in and seize these voting machines. And so when you have the grown-ups saying this is what's going on, you then have Trump having knowledge and understanding what's going on. And so at that point, what does he do? Now you have that tweet, and that is central to his state of mind.
Right.
What is his intent here? These other plans didn't work. I still want to lie. I still want to cheat. And I still want to steal this election. So how am I going to get there? Well, I'm going to come up with a new plan. Let's fire up my base, inflame them, tell them still, even though I know there's no election fraud, tell them there's election fraud and to be there and to stop the count. There's intent, there's motive, there's knowledge. It's a great piece of evidence for the prosecutors, and that's why they're focused.
And it's also a great piece of evidence. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I did not go to law school, unlike both of you. But it's not a privileged conversation, right? You can't hide behind this, Lisa, because of the presence of people like Sidney Powell and, Patrick Byrne, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Christy and I can both tell you that there is no privilege in this conversation. There's no attorney-client privilege because there are people there who, to put it in layman's terms, are neither attorneys nor clients, right? They're not affiliated with the campaign. They're certainly not with the White House, and they are not clients either. And so that destroys any privilege that could have attached to that conversation.
Or that people would want to hide behind, right?
That's right. And, President Trump has litigated executive privilege thoroughly. He was found not to be able to claim executive privilege for conversations with people like Mark Meadows. If he can't claim it when he's alone with Mark Meadows, he's certainly not going to be able to claim it for a meeting that involves 18 people, including Patrick Byrne and Sidney Powell.
Right, and Mike Flynn. Let me ask you, because you talked about state of mind, it seems like when we put all these pieces together, the dribs and drabs we're getting, the reporting about what the special counsel is doing, they seem to be making a very concerted effort to get at Trump's state of mind and the fact that he knew the claims he was making were fraudulent, whether it's the ads that the super PAC was taking out and the low-level, copywriters who knew this stuff is fake, whether it's the conversations he has with state officials suggesting they throw effectively the election for him, or whether it's this meeting in the White House, they seem to be getting at they're chasing the same bone in all of that. Is that right? Like, they want to show Trump knew he was lying.
Right. You need to show intent to show that he committed a crime here. And it's interesting. That meeting happened December 18th. So in mid-December, you also have Cassidy Hutchinson, who said that around that same time in mid-December, Trump had a conversation with Mark Meadows that she overheard, where he said, I lost. I don't want people to know that I lost. So again, it's a lot of corroboration. You're going to have witness testimony, and then you're going to have the different witnesses corroborating one another. What did Donald Trump say? What was said in front of him? What did he know at different points, and how did that shape his actions and what he intended to do next?